like to contact the show, send us an email at liveonfourlegspodcast@gmail.com or get involved in the conversation on social media. Join the Pearl Jam Podcast community group on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at liveonfourlegspod.
Jack Irons, sing along. Jack Irons, sing it. Jack Irons, Jack Irons, Jack Irons. And away we go.
You're listening to Live on Four Legs, the live Pearl Jam podcast experience, featuring
Mr. Stone Gossard. Gentlemen! Mama Queen! Matt fucking Cameron in the drum. Mr. Boom Gasper. You can call me Al, you can call me Ed, you just fucking call me, why don't you?
Hey everybody now, welcome to Live on Four Legs, a definitive live Pearl Jam podcast, and we got a big show today under the big sky, blue sky of Missoula, Montana, and that's because we are heading up to the shows starting next week. Next Thursday will be our first show in Missoula, Montana, the hometown of one bass serenader, Ament, so to speak, and they've played there a couple of times over the years. It's not a music hotbed over in Montana, but when you got a hometown boy playing for one of the biggest bands in the world, they're going to go back there every now and again. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Missoula, Montana, and bring some of that information to you. And we'll get into a little bit of a bonkers set here. Look, this is 1995. This is right before, this is kind of considered to be the precursor to that South Pacific tour that they went on right after this. They were like a week away from going on that tour and playing their first show in, I believe, Japan somewhere. This is kind of the send-off. So it's kind of the last chance for everybody to get pretty comfortable with things. We had the Piss Bottle Men shows that were right before this, and before that we had Vote for Choice shows in Washington, D.C. So they had a couple under their belt already, but this is very new. Jack Irons is still very new in the band. And look, he has some songs that he's going to work really, really well on here, of course. And then maybe he's going to have to borrow something a little bit from some of the past drummers, because he is still getting used to some of the earlier songs from 10 and Versus, and even a song that wasn't on either of those records that we'll get to talking a little bit about. But I think we are bueno, sir. So let's get into the show. Randy Sobel over here, John Farrar over there.
Hello, hello.
Big stuff happening. We're almost on tour right now, as I mentioned before.
Feels like it's been a while since Europe ended. It feels like we're ready to get back into this thing.
I hate to say it, but like I've been feeling out of it. I don't know why. I don't know if there's fatigue or anything like that. And I don't want anybody to listen to me and be like, oh man, that sucks. Like, you're usually very energetic, but it's only in the sense of like, hey, I don't feel like posting on social media as much, unless like I need it to build back up. And yeah, I could be the one to build it back up for everybody, but it's summer. You just want to relax a little bit. So I think now is the time to start talking, to start getting ready for the shows, and Missoula will be a really good stop. And Missoula is interesting because obviously this is going to be the 8th time they play in Missoula coming up next week. And this is the 4th time in a row that it's been considered like a pseudo John Tester rally. And you can pretty much nail in the book that every 6 years they're going to go back to Montana as long as Tester is running for the Senate again. And I guess it seemed to have worked. So for Jeff, it's got to be really special to him, really important. I remember in the 2018 show, they gave Jeff a good amount of songs that he wrote in the set list, and I think he got to pick a little bit more than that, but it's always pretty special. Like, it's funny that we can say that there are so many towns in America that can be considered the hometown show, and this is certainly one of them.
Yeah, it's one of those adopted shows like San Diego, Chicago. Obviously, yeah, Missoula's a sneaky good Pearl Jam town because it usually gets those shows right before Seattle or right after Seattle. This is one of those as well where you had the big Piss Bottle Men secret shows, and then they kind of used Missoula as like a tune-up show. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's not like a big media hotspot or anything, so they can go just relax and have fun with it and be around a good crowd of people that are probably going to be a little bit more appreciative because they don't get a lot of bands that come through. And then, of course, the Jeff thing, I always love get when, Jeff gets the spotlight. We talk about it all the time. Yeah, I would expect maybe a pilot. Maybe we'll get a Sweet Lou breakout. I know some people are saying boo right now, but we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a little break. It's good to take a break because, a lot of stuff happened in Europe. There was a lot of stuff going on. It's good to take a little break. But now we're going to ramp it back up for a few weeks, get through these shows, and then on to New Zealand and Australia in November.
It's time to be busy for this shit, right? So, this isn't the first show from Missoula that we're covering today. However, it's the first one that we have sort of a record on. Now, the 1993 show is technically the second show of the Versus era, and we only have a set list to note, and there were a couple debuts on that show, I believe. Elderly Woman and Indifference were two of them. But again, this is one where they're going back home and they're doing a little bit of a send off to go on a tour that has a lot of unknowns in places that they had definitely never been before and would definitely not go back to after, in places like the Philippines and Singapore and places like that. The band is kind of in an interesting spot because once they come back to America after this, it'll be done with Ticketmaster and people will be scrambling to get to those shows and scrambling to find tickets and everything like that. But also, interesting to note from this show, there's a band that opened up called Shangri-La Speedway. And you know who the guitarist for Shangri-La Speedway is. Now, I'm sure as you're listening right now, you're like, who the hell is that? I've never heard of that band before. But you do know who the guitarist is. It is 110 Club president Tim Bierman. So this is interesting. Now they have a history. Jeff and Tim have a history. Tim moved to Montana right after high school and he worked in a record store for a little while. And some point around that time, him and Jeff met up and became friends. And the rest is history. He's now a prominent name in the Pearl Jam front office over there. And we did ask if he wanted to share something, if he wanted to come on the show. Unfortunately, we didn't get him, but as always, the invitation is always open. And if anybody is connected with him and wants to nudge him a little bit, feel free. We would love to talk to him about this show or anything. He seems like a good person to get some stories from. So just bringing that up there. But when you talk about 1995, you are very narrow minded to talk about a very specific storyline. So, share what storyline is that?
That would be the one and only Jack Irons.
Now, he's only got a couple of shows under his belt. There's actually a really wacky stat here that we'll get into at this show that's kind of funny with a song that is very prominent in Pearl Jam. But this is, I guess, kind of his last chance to get some of these songs under his belt, figure out what he has, and you can really tell easily what's in his wheelhouse at this show and what they're working on. Granted, he puts everything at full gas and he's full 100% at this, and it sounds incredible. He will be a massive talking point, a massive highlight at this show. If we don't talk about him for a song, that means we're thinking in another direction, I guess, but it mostly will be a lot of conversation about him. What was he doing to complement this band at this time? Why was he the right guy for 1995 after the tumultuous end of the W.M.A era?
Obviously, he goes back a long way with Ed. He was the one who passed the demo tape to Ed back in, 1990. Being in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, obviously Ed was a fan. They had kind of a mutual respect a little bit going on, and Jack was playing with Joe Strummer at that famous show where Ed got to meet Joe Strummer, and you've seen those pictures. And I think Ed really wanted him in the band to kind of be the glue that they needed to get them through that kind of like post grunge, the post superstardom era, because music was starting to move on in 1995. You had other bands, other things popping up, and I'm not the only one who've said this. I don't think they're a band today if not for Jack Irons. I think he's probably said that too. And yeah, I mean, these are some of my favorite shows to cover whenever we get to talk about Jack shows, just because he's got such a different sound than Dave or Matt or even any other drummers that they've had. It just added so much to the songs they were playing at the time. They immediately became just a completely different monster on stage with Jack behind the kid, and it's always really interesting to go back and listen.
As you'll hear at this show, there's a lot of praise for Jack during this era. Well, what's a 1995 show without going back and thinking about the bootleg distribution on this? And, this is one of those that definitely a lot of longtime fans that were collectors back in the day had this. This got circulated. A lot of the performances are memorable from this show because of that. So now we're going to invite in one half of the Hallucinogenic Recipe podcast, Patrick Bogle, in to talk about the bootleg aspect and see why this one was such a coveted bootleg from 1995.
Hey everybody, this is Patrick from Hallucinogenic Recipe. I'm going to be flying solo on this one. Brian is not able to join due to some extenuating circumstances. He will be with us in the near future, but we're here right now to talk about live from the Vitalogy Health Club. This is the illicit boot version of the 2895 show that John and Randy are covering this week. This was released on the Tornado label. This was one of those disaster labels that came out post the bootleg busts of 1994. And it really is one of the early versions of anything that was put out on Tornado. This is actually disc 6 and 7 on their catalog. And there was quite a number of Pearl Jam shows, especially from 95, that ended up on this label, but this is one of the first. It is recorded on Core Sound binaural microphones. The audience recording that was done for this is the only known source, is the Core Sound binaural recording. Gives it a little bit of a very heavy mono feel to it, just because of the nature of the way the microphone catches it. So it gives it a little bit of a different flavor than some of the other bootlegs that were coming out right around the same time. The two famous More Theater shows had a little bit of a different ambiance to them. That said, it's still a really, really great recording. You've got just incredible power of Jack. You just, if you were a drummer and you like drums, this boot is all in your face Jack Irons. So you can just get every cymbal, every tom, every kick, every snare. It's all there. And it's just an absolute clinic in terms of hearing Jack Irons in the early days of his stint with Pearl Jam. It's kind of amazing to look back at this particular show. You look at the set list for it, and I'm sure the guys are going to go in depth on this, but if you were to see this set list today, you would be pretty blown away in terms of the song selection, song structure, set structure, to have something like this going down. The main set is short. It ends with Immortality. There's an improv in there, so technically it's a 13-song set, and then they've got 2 encores that they go through. The other cool things about this one, from song perspective, Yellow Ledbetter, it's the 10th time that they played Yellow Ledbetter at the show, and it's amazing. Corduroy, which opens, is at its 11th playing overall. Ledbetter at this point had been played one fewer time. That would change a little bit in 95 as Ledbetter would become a more common, repetitive closer in the year, and obviously where things have gone on from there. But at the time, fairly, unique to get that one. The other things to look at, overall in the show, seventh Satan's Bed overall, 5 times already played in 1995 at this point. You've got Tremor Christ, its 11th time being played. That was almost every show occurrence from 1995. To see that on the set list, it would obviously fade away after 96 to be a pretty big rarity at that point. And then really only 3 songs from the early nascent 91, 92 Pearl Jam. The 2 from 10 and then State of Love and Trust is put in. Just some really great stuff. And a very interesting version of W.M.A. Really nice show. A lot of good vibes. You can hear the crowd is just intense. So this is a really good one. I've always gravitated to this. It's got such a great quality of a solid bootleg where you're able to hear everything. There isn't much from a drop-off standpoint. The CDs itself, the bootleg's a little bit weird in the sense that the way that they separated them from CD1 to CD2, Immortality actually begins CD2, Not For You, ends CD1. So you get a little bit of a jag there in terms of how the set completely goes at that point. But since the days of the original bootleg, there's been a lot of work that's been done on the original tape. And you can also go and find over at Pearl Jam Concert Chronology. You've got Fred Evans series, the DGR series that he's done. He did a remix on this in December of 2020 from the direct DAT source that was put to FLAC, and he's just done some modifications to really make sure that all the levels are completely balanced. And it does it justice because there are a couple of moments where things get a little bit off in the early part of the tape, but it ends up getting well balanced, well evened out, and it's just such a great listen. And like I said, from the standpoint of if you're a Jack fan, if you like drums, you can really hear it. You do get good, decent guitar separation for Mike and Stone for the most part. Jeff's hard to pick up at times. The bass, I find in these Poor Sound binaural mics, they seemingly get the bass a little bit buried to my ears, but give it a listen and let me know what you think on that. The last thing I'll say on this one is you've got the Vitalogy Health Club was the newsletter number 7 in 1995. Was probably early, very early in the year. This is before I was a member. I didn't get to be a member until later in the year, so I didn't receive letter 7, but for a short period of time, they flipped the 10 Club name. And I think it lasted until about newsletter 12 or 13 was when the switch started to go back to being exclusively the 10 Club. But the artwork for the CD is built off of newsletter 7. So if you've got that, you'd see the familiar nature of it. The things that they flipped on this instead of on newsletter 7, where there's a number 7 covering Ed's Eye, which is the front cover. There's a PJ on the bootleg cover. They also changed the tint, which was more of a sepia tone on the newsletter. They gave it this sort of blue shade for the bootleg itself. They obviously modified a little bit also in terms of the putting in the live from, but it's essentially built off of that. And the back cover is the back cover of the newsletter as well, with what looks like Ed and I'm guessing it's either one of the roadies or maybe it's Stone. It's so hard to say walking next to him, walking off in the distance. But it's an 8-page booklet, so they do pull a couple of photos in there that were in the newsletter itself. But a really good, just archival listen. This is a keeper for me. This is one of the ones that I still have. I'm holding my copy here. If you're able to find it, I'd highly recommend it. It's definitely one that's worth having in your collection if you can get your hands on a good copy, a clean copy that's still playable. If not, there's plenty of places to get a nice digital version. Like I said, they've got this over at PJ Concert Chronology for download. You can find it on Internet Archive and a couple of other places. Just a really unique, fun set list right before they head out to the Pacific Rim tour, and just lots of great new ways that they're attacking some of the songs that you just can feel like they're trying to feel each other out in a new way on stage. And that's so much about what 1995 was about. A lot more experimenting in moment than they had done much previously. Like a lot of the things that they had done prior to 95 were focused on a couple of songs that would be jam vehicles, and then very much forward focused on material, but this is the beginnings of a new era of Pearl Jam, and it's definitely one that I still love to go back to, and this is just such a great listen. So interested to hear what Randy and John have to say, and talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. We got a wealth of knowledge there as per usual, and a little, hopefully at some point in the future, we can get another one of those elusive recipes that those guys are always cooking up. So until that happens, we have a set list to get into right now. So let's jump right in. So, Vitalogy is going to be very, very, very prominent in this show. And you're going to kick off the first 4 songs and hit you in the face with some of the best Vitalogy songs and hardest Vitalogy songs. And to open up the show for the first time as an opener, it's Corduroy. Extended intro. Ooh, just build that up. Just allow it to just keep rising and keep having this methodical pace, and let the crowd sink into it, clap along with it, and enjoy it. I wish they would do this for every single Corduroy that they open the show with, just to build it up even more, and then have that moment where they can explode when they tap into the song and tap into the riffs. I can't say enough how much I love that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like the opening of Corduroy, it might be the best 10 seconds on a Pearl Jam record. I know we had some conversation on the Discord this week about like the best minute in Pearl Jam in their catalog, but that opening of Corduroy might be the best 10 or 15 seconds. And yeah, if you can take that and stretch it out and give it to a crowd, have it use it as a build before you get into the song, that worked really well. And yeah, for it to be the first time that they did that as an opener, it kind of like lays the foundation for all the Corduroy openers that came after it. And yeah, not just the intro, though, there's a lot going on here musically. You know, what Stone and Jeff are doing. Like you said, this is very early in the Jack era, only his 8th show. It's really the solo section where it just starts to blow your mind completely. And I'm not even talking about what Mike is doing. Like, that's just the icing on the cake. It's like what the rest of them are doing. I gotta think, you know, Ed's probably playing guitar still at that point too. Just so much going on. It takes 3 or 4 listens to really get your head around it.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call that a solo section, quote unquote, more than it is like a riff and rhythm section and just like a hard drive section, so to speak. Because you hear Mike, but Mike is definitely not prominent in the mix with this solo like he usually is. You're hearing the grind that Ed and Stone are putting together on this. You're hearing Jack go off. You're hearing Jeff filling those spots. And Mike is doing his thing, and I'm sure Mike is going off, but again, they're prominent here. You're hearing the drive, and honestly, you can't say that you hear that in versions of Corduroy too much nowadays. So to hear something like this, to get this, feels like there's more of a weight on the song. It feels like they were focused on putting the power into Corduroy instead of the finesse. And I like that. I really like that about Corduroy. Jack is terrific on this. There's a lot of bass drum presence in this song, and think a bit about it too. I think Corduroy for Ed, in Ed's sake, some of the lyrics he kind of wasn't completely confident on. I think the song in comparison from 1994 through 1995, did have a couple of changes here and there, so he wasn't quite there yet. Obviously, we know after 500 or so versions, 600, whatever it's on now, that Ed perfects it every single night, but that's where they were at the time. It was phenomenal once they got to the end and really started to get to the heavy stuff.
Yeah, and you even forget that this is only the 11th version of Corduroy. Like, I'm looking at Live Footsteps. I didn't even look at that when I was listening to this. Like, that's incredible.
We got more Vitalogy here. It's going to be Spin the Black Circle, into Last Exit, into Tremor Christ. I can't say enough. It's just heavy Vitalogy very early on. These are the songs that they're focused on getting down and getting the crowd into. Obviously, the album was released, not even 2 months, a little less than 2 months before this show had happened. While you get 8 Vitalogy songs, you get a total of 2 10 songs, which feels so out of place just in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, but you got to think they were looking upwards and forwards at the time. They wanted to leave songs like Jeremy and Black and Alive a little bit in the past and focus on what the wheelhouse songs for Jack Irons was going to be. And you think about all three of these are just classic Jack songs. Spin the Black Circle, he is insane on. He completely flips it upside down. And even after Corduroy, that has an edge, that has that grind to it, as I was saying, even after that, Spin still feels like you completely turn the set upside down just within the first 2 songs. It's not like you're going from releasing the Spin the Black Circle, where you're definitely doing that, but from Corduroy and the Spin the Black Circle, that's how it feels. Jack's a monster at the end of this. It finishes with him going like double time on it, and there's just this massive push. I think you're going to say that with just about every one of these songs, that Jack has that influence and Jack's putting that in. It's just like, okay, we're at this pace. All right, now let's see what we can do. Let's rev it up a little bit more and see how crazy we can get on it. And Spin's just an awesome example of that.
That's the difference, right? That's something that I don't think Dave or Matt would ever have thought to do in their 8th show. They gave him free reign to be like, hey, if you feel like you want to go in a different place with these, do it. And we saw that throughout that 95 tour, where songs were starting to stretch out to 6-7 minutes, Corduroy and Immortality and Not For You, most definitely, but some other ones as well. And yeah, you're getting through Spin the Black Circle and you're like, okay, we're getting into the show here. And then it gets to that ending and he just completely obliterates it. And you're just like, oh my God. Yeah, just inject this directly into my veins. One of the best Spin the Black Circles I've heard in a long time.
Oh yeah, and I think we had one 2 weeks ago that I at least put number 1 on my list, and this is better than that, and this might not be number 1 on my list tonight.
It might not even make the top 3. This show's loaded.
I know, that's the thing. It might not make my top 3 either. I look down the line and there's just so much to talk about here that your 8th place song might be number 1 on another set, even in 1995, maybe. Last Exit following up, again, more intensity. You're getting the Jack push. Ed's voice has that vigor that makes it stand out, that big scream at the end where he's belting it out. And Tremor Christ, too, fantastic. Jack, again, front and center. Jeff sounds amazing on this. It's plotting yet in a good way. Almost, how many times have I got to say this with 1995 versions of Tremor Christ? It feels like the Funhouse song. Crazy things are going on. You're seeing when you look at funhouse mirrors and you see like, okay, my body stretched up, my body stretched down, it feels like an alternate reality as to what's going on within the song with just its makeup and how hard Jack is hitting with this, along with just that creamy bass line that Jeff puts down.
Well, see, I thought you were going to go talking about Funhouse, the Stooges album. I'm thinking like we're getting some Stooges like Dirt or TVI, like
I love TVI.
Getting some dirty Stooges influence on there. I can see that too.
Yeah, TVI, I love that song, so I'm fine with that reference for sure. And you know what? It's also Ed, like singing that bridge that, he really put something into that. I can't remember a time where I heard him that just excited and intense to do that. That was a phenomenal piece of this song. Well, you got 4 from Vitalogy, and now you're going to go to the first of the 2 10 songs. And it's not what you think. What's usually, if you got a 5th place song right here, what's the song do you think they would go to if they're picking a 10 song? Probably Why Go.
Why Go Deep.
Yeah, maybe Once.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It ain't any of those. It's Porch. Early set Porch. It's, I think, an indication that we're just embarking on a new era here. It's not going to be the version that they close shows with, that Ed is going to climb the scaffolding and make a big deal here. It feels like not that they're trying to make Porch an afterthought, because it wasn't. It was played at 88% of shows in 1995. Impossible for it to be an afterthought. But I think the thing here is that when you think about what's going to close the main set, especially, they wanted to highlight other songs in that role to make them stand out. And to figure out what they had with Porch early in the set to kind of almost transition out of Tremor Christ and go into a different, I guess, mindset here. It's hard to fathom, but it works pretty well. It's just not one of those versions that's going to be the 8-minute long solo or anything like that. You can't consider that to be in the number 5 spot.
It's interesting too, because I would say Porch would probably be Abraziz's best live song. Like from 92 to 94, this was the showstopper. Like this was the one that they brought the house down with. But now they're a different band. They've got different songs to do that with. You start to see Blood is taking over that spot, and Immortality, like you said. You're in Missoula, you're about to go to Japan and the Far East. You've just played 4 new songs in a row, so if they had broken out a Deep or a Garden or Black or something here, like Jack might not be familiar with those songs, but Porch is a pretty straightforward. You can tell that they can practice that one. So, I mean, I kind of like it here. I get that we're used to hearing Porch later, but it's a nice change of pace.
So I'm going through some statistics that Dave from livefootsteps.org had sent to me. And it's not a perfect science, because when you go back, I wanted to know how many shows that Porch was in the top 5 songs for before 1995. And it's not too much, and it's also like a little bit of an asterisk here. So I got one from the Off-Ramp show in 1991, where it was played 4th after Alone out of 10 songs, which looks to be Oceans as the closer. I wonder if we have a bootleg for that, because that seems to be potentially out of order. It's a weird looking set. Jeremy live debut, we're gonna have to look into that one. We have a Portland, Oregon show in 1991, September, where Porch was played 5th. A couple of shows that were smaller. I don't think this show in 1991 is complete, but that was played 5th there. Athens show from 1992. How were you not at that show? That was played 4th there, but again,
I
it
was
looks a
I was
little
13.
short.
I wasn't in Athens.
Even this looks a little short. They only played 6 songs, so that might be the reason why. But 1991, this was on the Red Hot Chili Peppers tour in Springfield, Massachusetts. Porch was played 5th, and I've Got a Feeling closed the show at 6, so that's a really short one. And then when it was played for the second time, obviously they're still figuring out what they have with that song, so that was played in between Once and guess what song? Just a Girl. Yeah. The last ever appearance at the Town Pump for Just a Girl. And then there's one, Clarkston, it looks like 1992 on the Lollapalooza tour, where Porch was opened with, and then they closed the show with a live until once. So out of the many, probably upwards of like 300 shows that they had played to that point, Porch in the top 5, not happening too often. Glorify G and Daughter are going to follow up on Porch here. And again, that's kind of taken from the Versus era. You're going to play those 2 Jeff stand-up bass songs back to back here. And it's interesting because the first 4, well in Jack's wheelhouse. And then when you get to the Versus songs, he's still trying to figure it out. I don't think Glorify G was ever really like a massive Jack song, especially since in the No Code era, they kind of dropped it. That's always been a Dave A song to me. That always feels like Dave A.
He had more of like a pop on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And he would get better at Daughter for sure, but very early on, it seemed like he was trying to be a little bit too heavy, coming in a little bit too hard for a song like Daughter that needs to take a little bit of the edge off instead of put it back on. So what did you think of him on the Versus songs? And granted, this is very, very early for him working with these, and there are a lot of Versus songs that he does really well with. He'll do really well with River Mirror. He'll do really well with Blood. So what'd you think about these 2 and how he was adjusting to?
Yeah, not the best. He needed Dave's little tiny cymbal and all of Dave's 92 cymbals that he carried in his kit there. But those to me are Dave A songs, like Daughter, that little drum intro, like the with the little bell and everything. That's not what Jack does. That's not what he's about. He's way more rhythmic and more into playing by feel, not doing, I hate to say cute because that sounds derogatory and that's not what I'm trying to say, but Dave A, he had more flair when he played. That's not what Jack was about. It's just a different style. I don't think it fit as well on these songs.
Yeah, to me, when I was hearing Daughter go, I'm like, it doesn't need to be Last Exit. It just didn't need to sound like that. However, when you get into the tag, I think that's where Jack can be Jack. That's where Jack can do whatever the hell he wants. And Ed does the voice altering, the megaphone bit on the tag. We get 2 songs tagged here, 2 songs important to the Pearl Jam lore. One of them being Starboy, the Frog song that they would go on and play later in 1995 with the Frogs at the Milwaukee show and Summerfest. And then The Real Me, which would end up being a pretty prominent cover in the late 2000s, early 2010s. For me, The Real Me is the one to talk about here because Ed really lets it rip. He just tears everything into it and gives it all he has, and the crowd absolutely erupts for this. What a moment that was. Just hearing Ed go off on, and granted, it's The Who. Ed at that time is going to do justice by his favorite band, and later in the set, he will do it again. Not technically The Who, but he'll do it again. He sounds fantastic. One of the best stretches for a Daughter tag that I've heard where he just goes off like that.
Early on when he would do these Who tags and Who covers, you just feel like he's just a kid in his bedroom playing along. He's just living out the dream of the 8-year-old Ed. But yeah, I thought the Frogs tag was good too. that Starboy EP, the Frogs put out like a CD with Starboy and I Only Play for Money and a couple of their songs. That was the Frogs release that you could get that was available, and I had that CD for a while. So that brought me back a little bit because Starboy is one I don't think a lot of people were familiar with, so that piqued my attention a little more.
So there was supposed to be a song in between Daughter and Go right here, but it didn't happen. As you know, as we said before, there were only 2 songs played at this show. And as also we said before, Porch was kind of being in the experimental role as the number 5 song. Now, if this song were played in between here, this would have been a massive experiment because outside of the opener position, this song at that time was going through this massive streak that would end in 2008, where the only times that it would be played would be as the opener. So originally in the set list between Daughter and Go was Release. How about that? Imagine
Yeah,
the
I can't
trajectory.
see it. Yeah.
Imagine the trajectory of history changing if that suddenly became a mid-set song.
Yeah, like after Even Flow, you reset, Release comes in, and I can't hear it.
It feels too heavy for that. It feels like there's too much of an
Yeah.
emotional weight, you know?
Yeah, it would have to be a different kind of thing. It's almost like, hitting the reset button halfway through. You're like, oh, forget everything that we did up until now. Here's where it really starts. And yeah, I can't see it working.
Well, it didn't. They couldn't see that either, obviously. So instead, they opted to do Go, Animal State of Love and Trust. And it's like the same formula. You start off with 4 Vitalogy and get into a 10, and then you go 4 verses and get into a 10 era with State of Love and Trust. So Go to me, I feel like I didn't mention it before, but I feel like Go is another one that Jack is terrific on. But to me, this is all about Mike in this version. But before we talk a little bit about Mike, I think you got to mention the intro to this. There's an extended build up for it that is reminiscent to the album Jam.
One of you guys is much bigger than me.
It sounds a little bit wild. I gotta think that's let's give Jack a minute to kind of get a feel for this thing before it kicks in. Maybe they had some issues when they were rehearsing it with getting the intro down, but anytime you give Jack the reins and here, just go play for a minute. We'll follow you. Just take this and run with it. You're always gonna get something really cool. And yeah, I wish they had kind of stuck with it because it gives it a little more different feel. Like when everybody kicks in at the same time, you get this really strong impact. But this way, I think it just sounds a little more feral. It's a little more unhinged. I kind of like it.
Same. I think it's a raucous version anyway. And again, it explodes and then Mike takes it away on this. Like the Porch solo was a little bit more bluesy and of course shortened for Porch, so you don't get the impact that Mike usually gets. I feel like Go is really the first time where Mike gets to stand out. As I would say before with Corduroy, that he didn't have that solo where he was in the prominent spot. Go is his first one where Mike is the show, the star. Animal following after that, and then State of Love and Trust after that. I think State of Love and Trust is really interesting here because if you're talking about songs that you got to see what you have with, try and work with it. Where's this going? Maybe we wanted to do something a little bit different than we did with W.M.A. Yeah, well, I commend them for trying, but it was a weird attempt. song goes on, the tempo is all over the place. Like, rushed, but also like Jack in spots. I don't know if he's trying to push in places where he shouldn't be pushing, but it felt like it didn't have an identity, and especially not an identity that we know the song to have. It was a little strange. And you know what? We had listened to versions of State 11 Trust with this before. I think we talked about, you specifically said that it sounded like the No Effects kind of drum beat.
It's that kind of cut time where Jack is just like on the one the whole time, like boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom. I like this version though. I think it's of the time, and like you're coming after Go and Animal. It's like we want to give this a little bit of a different feel. And again, they're trying out things with Jack to be like, hey, let's give this a shot. Yeah, I kind of was into this.
Always going to be a more traditionalist by heart, and I do again like commend them for trying something different, but it didn't work for me. I think if it was more structured, I think if they had a true plan instead of just going up and down and changing sporadically, I think it would have been fine if they would have found like a groove with it. But to me, it never found a groove, and it kind of did things that felt a little awkward for the song. So I was a little off on it. But also, I don't know if you noticed this, but is Mike doing some like flamenco style picking at the end?
I think he was just trying to keep up. Yeah, I mean, it got a little bit off the rails, but I think that makes it interesting. You need music to go off the rails sometimes. You get to some interesting places.
Yeah, I'm not against going off the rails, but I also like have a plan. I don't know if this had a plan. So, well, as the next thing that would come in is an improv, and improvs never really have a plan unless you're, the Red Hot Chili Peppers that plan their improvs. It's like a droning, bassy note seeps in, and Ed is doing this. I don't know about the future. And this is kind of known to be stuff and nonsense. And that's a quote that I like to use just generally in my everyday life. Like, hey, how's it going? Well, stuff and nonsense. It's a very casual thing. And I think it probably definitely comes from here. But, as it keeps going on, the crowd beefs it up. They start clapping and getting involved. And then Jack and Stone come in a little bit more. But right about at the middle tail end of it, you start hearing some chords come in, and you're like, it sounds familiar to me. I know what this is all coming ahead. I know what this is all going into. This feels very much like an intro for Not For You. It's kind of on average like an improv every night in 1995, so this is just another one to throw on the board. Was this on your little album, your little soundtrack that you put together years ago?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was on there. I mean, it's basically a cover of that Split End song, Stuff and Nonsense. I mean, they had done I Got You. I mean, Tim Finn, Neil Finn, obviously, in Split Ends, so Ed's a big fan. But Split Ends, it's a cool band, but like the Pearl Jam version of I Got You, I think is superior. Split Ends a little more of a new wave thing, but a cool band nonetheless. One we should probably do on Deprogram one of these days. But
I mean, I pitched Crowded House, so we got to do that.
For sure. I'm a sucker for an improv, and yeah, a lot of these 95 improvs are very, very cool, and they have like a running theme of like the desolation and the price of everything and Open Road and some of the other ones that are more familiar from this era. They all kind of like have this cohesion to them, and this fits in there as well.
Getting into Not For You, and Not For You is very much definitive of what 1995 was, just the raw sound and just the energy and the intensity that they'll bring to Vitalogy songs, and this did just that. And it has the original outro on it too, which again at that time there was no Modern Girl. It was years away from being a thing, so you got to find out a way to close the song somehow, and it sounds cool. It's a little bit at the end that you would get to hear on the album as well.
This was, I think, the most played Vitalogy song at this point, 27 times already. And I think a lot of those 94 versions, people know Saturday Night Live, of course, a lot of anger and a lot of fury in those versions. But here, like, they bring that bridge down real quiet, letting Jack go off on that ending as well before you get to that awesome, just little quiet outro thing. And yeah, Not For You, maybe one of their best songs at the time, and giving it a spot here as kind of the penultimate song in the main set tells you that that's, something that they were just running with. I mean, a song that they had played a bunch of times and were very, very familiar with.
I'm going to fact check you. Whipping had 30 at this time, so I think Whipping was in the lead. But Whipping was also being played since May of 1993, so that makes sense.
Sure.
The fact that Not For You caught up in 6 months after the debut of that, I think definitely speaks volumes, because they were playing it nearly every other night in that March 94 tour. So after the first 12 songs, it's going to be the first time you address the crowd. That's pretty standard for 1995. It's not like the 2014 show that we did a couple weeks ago where you're like, whoa, 8 songs in a row, that's insane, they killed it. I mean, this is just brushing off your shoulder, like it's nothing. Ed says, we don't know what you had to do to get here, but I'm sure glad you can make it. He introduces everybody in the band and then spotlights out the hometown boy, Jeff Ament. And Stone tells the crowd to thank him for having them out tonight, because anytime they do go to Missoula, that is all Jeff's doing for sure. Ed says, you're lucky that he has so many old enemies that he wanted to impress tonight. That was a big hand, and we're not that kind of band asking for applause, but even more so than Jeff, if it weren't for this guy, we'd no longer be there. And then we get that Jack Irons jam with Ed singing his name, Jack Irons, Jack Irons. And then in between, you hear Mike doing the Jeff Ament, Jeff and Jeff. So
that
was pretty funny. To end the main set is Immortality for 9 minutes. I think more like 7.5. Because there's going to be a speech afterwards, I think, is on the back side of that. But still, 7.5 is pretty good. Now, if you want to play role reversal with Porch and kind of show that this is a different era using this kind of song to say goodbye before coming back, you made it pretty well known. Now, this really starts to elevate at the end. The Immortality solo from Mike stays pretty balanced and steady comparison to what others in 1995 were like, but it's about how after the song technically ends, how they're going to obliterate it. And at first, very mellow, kind of spacey. Then you hear Jack just start to kind of take some hits a little harder. It keeps building until he finally just cracks and has that moment he takes off. And that's when you become the Jack Show. And that's why Ed was singing his name just a couple minutes before the song was played, because it's full non-stop gas on this. Classic Jack fucking Irons. the best song of the Vitalogy era live, and they know they have something special with it.
To be only the ninth performance of this live is the stuff of legend, like just an unbelievable performance. I mean, you're listening to this kind of like meander and this journey that it takes you on. And I'm reminded of something. I think, can't remember exactly who the songwriter was. It's not Pearl Jam related, but there was like, oh, this person writes songs like the song becomes a living, breathing thing. And that's what I was reminded of listening to Immortality. This song is like walking around and breathing, and you're watching it grow as it goes on and on. It's unbelievable.
All right. Well, this is not the encore yet because this is before Ed left the stage, at least from what it seems like on the bootleg. So we'll get into this right now. Before I go, did you see over there? It says BS. Do you know what that stands for? The crowd screams, bullshit, 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 bun shine, big shrimp, beluga snot, bum shot, bug street, buff shine, blood sample, bean shoot, ball sack, beef stew, beef shank, beef swellington, beef sucks, beet seed, ball sucker, bank shot, buff steroid, beefcake shithead, black is beautiful, Buffy swirl, Buffy St. Marie, Bobby socks, blank sheets, beanie sweat, bulbous shrinky, Playboy bunny suck, black spit, bully split, bonehead bitch slap, brown shit, big sky. Thanks, good night. We're in the encore. Let's pause for station identification, talk a little bit about Patreon. Let's thank one new patron this week. Thank you to Christine Bednars for joining up on the yearly tier on the bonus leg. Thank you, Christine. And it is coming to be that time. We are a week away from getting back into shows. And if you are hyper fixated on what they're doing at the shows and you want the instant analysis right afterwards, I mean, beat that dead horse because we got it. Because it's, again, what brings the milkshake to the yard, or the boys. This is the milkshake that brings the boys and the girls to the yard, is that we do these reaction episodes after every single show that they play live. It's out for you either that night or the next morning. It's that quick. So if you are interested in following along on tour, if you're going to shows and you're like, yeah, I want to hear what they say about the Wrigley show or about Baltimore or about Fenway, on and on and on. There's lots of shows that we'll be talking about, obviously. Then it's going to be on Patreon where you're going to want to hear these reaction episodes. So easy thing to do is just to go to patreon.com/live on4legs and join up on there. And look, it helps us out. We are a podcast that is not sponsored or funded. We do not have commercials that are run on our podcast. We do not take influencer money. I feel pretty strongly against that. Even in 6 years after doing this, I still feel like if we did that, not that it's a sellout, but it wouldn't feel like a fan podcast anymore. It would just feel like we'd be out to make money. So that's why it's all through donations. It helps us out. It puts us out there, and it gets us to places on tour sometimes and do some cool things. Like in Philadelphia this year, we'll be doing the Pearl Jam Karaoke 3. Really excited to get that going, especially that is my birthday on that. So if you're going to Philadelphia, you'll be there in between the shows. Would love to have you join us. It's going to be a good time. We're going to be doing a live podcast about the Spectrum shows. So if you were at the Spectrum shows, you'll have a lot to talk about for sure. And then we'll sing some Pearl Jam karaoke songs, and we'll have some special guests hanging out there too, I think. So that's all going into what the bigger landscape is for this podcast. And we just want to keep being able to service you guys as much as we can and help you guys out and give you the content as much as we can. That's why on Patreon, we also have more episodes outside of the reaction episodes, evolution episodes, where we focus on a live song and the history and how it's grown and changed throughout the years. We have a series that we used to do called the Late Night Series, which focused on all the Letterman shows and all their late night appearances on shows like SNL, Conan, Colbert, all of those. and Bridge School series, which we did a long time ago. All of the Bridge School episodes are up and on there to listen to. But also, one of the ongoing things that we have from our wonderful friend and guru, Javier Hervas, is that he has been doing the Gear Garage, where he's been breaking down the Pearl Jam catalog and going through and showing you guys how the songs are created. And the next task, which is happening very, very soon, this will be out. I'm hoping by the time that you're hearing this, you'll be able to go to Patreon and hear it. But Deconstructing Dark Matter Part 2 featuring Won't Tell, an amazing version of Upper Hand, which I know this is why it's taken this long, because that Upper Hand intro is being perfected as we speak. And then Waiting for Stevie, of course, will be on that episode as well. The just juicy three in the middle of that record where he's going to tackle. I'm very excited to hear what he has for that. And that in itself is worth the price of admission when joining up on Patreon. So again, it's patreon.com/live on four legs, or you can go to the Patreon app, search for Live on Four Legs and find it there, or you can go to liveonfourlegs.com, read a couple of the Concertpedia entries and see what else is out there on the website. And then you and just click the Become a Patron button and join for as low as $1 a month. Or, like Christine, you can pledge $10 for a whole entire year and not have to worry about paying monthly. Hey, it's good to not have to worry about things, right? Right. So, we appreciate everybody that's been contributing, and this has been a slow summer, but as things get ramped up, obviously the reaction episodes are going to be a huge part of it. The bootlegs have been a huge part of it for everybody that's on Horizon, and the gig leg tiers, which are $5 and $10 a month respectively. So that's going to continue on, and then once after the reaction episodes, we'll be able to put out some really cool stuff again and focus on what you guys go to Patreon for. It's all about getting and giving back to you guys who contribute to the show and give you guys the content that you deserve. With that being said, get back to the rock. Okay, so we're going right back into Vitalogy here. Back-to-back songs with Satan's Bed and Whipping. Probably one of the most intense performances of Satan's Bed from Ed that I've heard in a while. There's a ton of drive and push. Like, Ed is very fiery on it. And I think because it's relevant, I'm going to bring this up. The recent death of Shannon Doherty brings to light kind of some of the ideas of how and what Satan's Bed is about. And that kind of been brought back to my mind after it happened, after she unfortunately had passed away. And there was an incident between the two where she really wanted to meet him, and he felt uncomfortable with that because obviously he was dating Beth for 8 years at the time, so he felt like he was being stalked, and it seemed like a really just ugly situation. And a lot of the lyrics that you read in Satan's Bed can be traced back to this moment. And granted, nothing that Ed ever writes is always about something dead on specifically, especially at the time. It can be generalized, it can be up to your interpretation, but I think for a lot of people that had put together what that song's been about over the years, it's loosely related for sure.
Yeah, I mean, 90210 was like a huge thing in the culture. I mean, I think they brought it back for a reboot like a few years ago with varying results. But, I mean, that show was everywhere back then. She was a huge star.
Yeah, that was before my prime. So yeah. I never watched it. And you know what? I had shows like that were in my prime, like the OC, and I never watched any of those shows either. So, move on. Whipping, real quick, there's a massive crowd reaction during a part of Whipping, and apparently during the show at some point, fans near the stage seemed like they threw themselves over the barricades that had been set up between the stage and the crowd, and security guards behind the barricades spent the evening catching fans and escorting them back into the mosh pit. I wonder if there was something related to that, an incident, I guess, that they had to take care of and people were reacting to it. I'm just kind of trying to put two and two together here, but it was definitely an audible reaction at some point at the song.
You'll hear that sometimes when a fan gets on stage and acts stupid for a little bit. Like, hey, I'm on stage with Pearl Jam, look at me, and everybody kind of reacts to that. But I mean, other than that, just again, a furious version of Whipping here too. Jack on the build there right before the ending just like throttles that thing.
So before getting into Even Flow, our second and final 10 song of the night, believe it or not, there is a reference from a cover that is very popular in Pearl Jam history, and that is a little bit of take a bottle, drink it down, pass it around. Get a little Crazy Mary reference here before digging into Even Flow, which, when you start the song, usually you know how it starts that, wow, this doesn't do that. I had heard this before somewhere. I can't for the life of me remember where I had heard it. I'm going to guess it might be another 1995 show. In my head, it might be a 1992 show. But I seem to remember like a music video or something where you heard that kind of version. I know it's from somewhere. And talking to you and talking to Patrick and Brian, trying to put it all together, it's a little hazy, but there's something a little bit more prominent than just this version that's out there that features that.
Yeah, I had heard this before too, and I haven't gone back and watched this in a long time, but that 95 tour documentary, which you can watch now, I think on the director's website, Duncan Sharp, I think if I remember correctly, put it up on his website a few years ago. I'm going to have to go back and check that out because the timing matches up, because that would have been filmed right after this when they were over in the Far East in Australia. So I think that's probably what it was, but I have to go back and check. But yeah, it's another example of giving Jack something different to play with and giving him an opportunity to get into the groove before the song starts.
Yeah, it's one of the changes that I actually really like, and I wish they would have implemented it even more at that time, and I wish it was more of a prominent thing. Even nowadays, like, they can open the song like that, but it's just too big of a song to really do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? After the song, Stone kind of quips. He said, "We hadn't played that one very much. I bet you can tell." He kind of says, "What the hell was that?" right after as well. So, here's what happened. The solo is kind of interesting here because Mike is doing his thing, and then at some point, it doesn't dip down like it usually does. There's no, like, finishing part of the solo where it kind of gives that time to build back. It's all blended together. So while Mike is soloing, you hear that dun 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 dun, dun. You hear all that, and you hear Jack start to rev it back up, which sounds terrific. But it was strange because I don't remember a time where they've ever done that in Even Flow before, where they blended the two spots and then just roll right into the outro chorus to finish. And then even after that, you hear Ed kind of over embellishes the ending lyrics a little bit, which doesn't usually happen. But again, you play Even Flow every single night, something's got to give, right? But it's interesting because you don't ever hear something like that from Even Flow. It's usually very, while not structured, it usually has its pieces that fit in the right puzzle.
It had been 9 shows since they'd played Even Flow, and that just sounds ridiculous to say, but this is Jack's first version. Like, they hadn't played it since Paramount, the last show with abridged. So yeah, maybe just a little bit of both of those coming together to be like, hey, maybe somebody missed a cue, maybe in rehearsals it didn't go very well, but we were looking before we started, like, I think this is tied for the biggest gap between Even Flows and Pearl Jam's history. You'll never see them go 9 shows without playing it.
Yeah, no, the only other time they went 9 shows, which is really kind of cheap if you think about it, the November 6th show at Key Arena, obviously to close the binaural tour. They didn't play it again until the Key Arena show in 2002. And in between those were like bridge school shows, the groundwork benefit that was in between. They didn't really do much in 2001. The Showbox shows, the House of Blues show where Stone didn't show up. So it's not much. You know, they weren't like legit big time Pearl Jam stage shows that they were missing there. If you go down and look at the list, you're lucky to see much more than 4. Even outside of 9, the second highest is 6. And then a couple of 4s, mostly 1s and 2s, if even the 2s exist. So, yeah, barely ever to get that to that. Okay. The coup de grace of this show is being talked about in this spot. This is the best kept secret in the Pearl Jam catalog. The 3 very rare appearances of W.M.A. in full that happened on Jack's watch. This is the second of 3. They play one at, I believe, the first night at the Piss Bottle Men shows. And then they do one in Tokyo the following week when they're over in Japan. And then it never happens again. It stays that way until 2008. But when you bring Jack in, and Dave is very much, when you think of this song, like this is a Dave standard song. But the dynamics when Jack come in totally change. The song is still incredibly tribal, but Jack kind of goes to these absurd lengths to create this incredible thunder that just livens the entire band up. That's what's incredible of what Jack does here. He motivates and he lights a fire under everybody else, because usually when you hear W.M.A., it's a little bit more tense and a little bit more easing its way up and building to the big moments. This is heavy. This is hard. This is more of a grind, like I mentioned before, with like a Spin the Black Circle or something like that, or a Corduroy. This doesn't let up. There's no dead points in this song. This is full go the whole entire way, which is very rare for W.M.A. I see it as this. It's kind of like the band was complimenting him and playing a battle song behind him. Like, you're going to go to war with Jack for this. So much heavier than anything they've done with this version before. And now, obviously, this has, in recent years, been reduced to more of the acoustic side, more of a mellower side. When you had that version with Josh and they were able to kind of do the dueling drum things, that was very cool. But you ain't ever seen a version of W.M.A. with Jack that's like this. It's just some of the best that Pearl Jam has ever done in their whole entire career.
I mean, if you're looking for an argument from me, you're not going to get one. Words almost don't describe it. I mean, it's another one that goes on for over 7 minutes. I mean, yeah, Jack is the standout, but to me, the thing that really elevates it above and beyond nearly anything else is when Stone comes in on that guitar lead at the end. That's super melodic, just almost to the very end, like one of the last couple of minutes of the song, he just comes in on this lead and Mike is still soloing, but Stone's doing this thing underneath, and it just adds this kind of like you mentioned, like kind of like a battle song. It's almost like, like a war. He's doing this very ominous but melodic guitar lead, and it never heard anything like it before in a Pearl Jam song. It's amazing. And Ed doing his tongue-in-cheek, like, "Hi, Jesus," at the end, giving it some levity, like, yeah, this has everything you wanted. I think it's one of the best performances of their career. I mean, top 100, top 50, whatever you want to say. This is one that doesn't nearly get talked about as much as it should.
Yeah, I think I'm partial to the Piss Bottle Men version, even just as much as this one, probably because I heard that first, but still, you want something to knock you off your ass with this. And think about this, we don't have a lot of full versions from Dave A. Most of what we have are tags, and really the meaty version of this song really comes from that Atlanta version from 1994. That's the one that we really have from his era. So this is definitive of what early W.M.A. is, to be honest with you. Now, you mentioned all of Stone stuff, and one of the things that I asked Javier for was I wanted him to listen to this and just take in what everybody's doing. And I think you're absolutely right. The melodic piece that Stone was throwing in at the end was beautiful. I didn't even put it in my notes because I didn't really know how to explain it, but I knew he was adding in something that had a little bit more technique that kind of shined a little bit that you weren't really expecting. You don't hear something like that from W.M.A. So let's get Javier's perspective on this, because I think this is going to be something really cool for him to break down.
Hey Randy, hey John, hey everyone in the podcast. 1995. I don't think I remember to listen such a good version of the song in a while. And actually, fun story for everyone listening for this week, I thought that I needed to look for something wrong when actually was not the case. Because when I was listening to the version, I was just like, there's nothing wrong with this. But then talking to the guys, it was like, well, no, you need to listen to it because it's freaking great. And indeed it is. One of my favorite things about this song is how faithful it is to the original version and how like the tone is respected so much. Like major key points for me, Stone melody, the mid end is freaking great, and how Jack is pushed the band kind of like to rev up in a version like this. Like sometimes this can be a big mess, but in this case I think they totally nail it. And actually, they only have done 3 versions with Jack, which adds even more to this. Like I was saying, love the tone, love the dynamics, how locked in the band is right now, and especially because it's a rhythm that if you're not completely in tune with the rest of the players, can quickly be a mess. What are the other highlights for me? I love like the little lick, sometimes it is ignored, but in this version, everything isn't the way that it's supposed to be. Technical details, if we go around that time, again, a lot of hair, guys, a lot of air, a lot of volume, big amps, stacks, JCM 800s, pretty classical and typical for that era if you want to dig into that. But that's all I got for this week.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. And again, we are waiting, and hoping, and can't wait to hear Deconstructing Dark Matter Part 2. So when that happens, you guys will know, I'll know, and we'll have something good on our hands. Now, W.M.A. is just so mind-blowing that anything that's going to follow up is almost set up for failure.
Yeah, it feels anticlimactic now. Like we had the best moment. We can just stop now.
Right. And the song that's going to follow it is Blood to close the first encore. And Blood, which these two songs are back to back on the record, Blood is an afterthought? How is that even possible? I felt like, I don't know, was W.M.A. 7 minutes of sex and then you just needed a cigarette afterwards? You needed a breather from it? Like, and then the breather is blood?
Blood's great. Like, Blood's great. Don't get me wrong. It's not.
Yes.
It's just not like if we had a video that would help, because I'm sure there was some stuff going on with Ed, but it feels like, yeah, I don't know. It just, W.M.A. should have been the closer and like they should have played Blood first or something. But I mean, it is a 1995 Blood. It's still great. It's still got all those aspects of Blood that you like, but it doesn't have that extra thing to like send it over the top.
W.M.A. emasculated its power. That's how I'm going to put that. It just obliterated what the impact of Blood usually is on you. And that's not, like you said, that's not against the song at all. That's just how good that version of White Male American was. Encore 2. Eddie chants are filling up the place, and he says, "Shut the fuck up." He did not like when people chanted for him. He did not like that spotlight. He did not want to be that guy. It made him feel uncomfortable. I mean, he won't say "shut the fuck up" like he did then, but it'll be like, I'm not the one you want to cheer for Mike, cheer for Matt kind of deal. He says, "I'm a bigger loser than all y'all put together, but it's nice to be here in good company. I don't know this next song too well, and I haven't played it in a long time. You mentioned this before with The Real Me, about sitting on the bed. That reminded me of what he's going to say here. I used to sit on my bed and play it. So it's to celebrate what would have been Bob Marley's 50th birthday a few days ago. And this right here is the Live on Four Legs debut of Redemption Song." I think when you think of Redemption Song, 4 times. It's only been played 4 times in the whole entire live history. And I think when most people think about it, they think about that kind of contrived version that happened at Global Citizens Festival with Beyonce and him sharing the stage. And I like, to me, that just felt like the promoters of that show were saying to Pearl Jam, like, okay, you can headline, you can go on last, but since Beyonce's not last, you have to involve her somehow. And I don't know, it just, I'm not saying that they didn't have a good time or anything like that, but it just not something you really wanted to see. It's just, yeah, and no, and that's nothing against Beyonce, but it just, I don't know, it felt uncomfortable in ways. But when he
It
does
made
it
the fan
here,
club single that year.
it did. It did. Fair enough. It did. But when he does it by himself here, and yeah, you hear in the beginning, he kind of is figuring out how to play the song. And while hearing this, it reminded me of just me and specifically my friend Tim, and how we were discovering how to learn music in, I don't know, like 10th, 11th grade or so. And this song was like a gateway drug into learning how to play guitar. It's pretty simple. You can learn how to finger pick, you can learn how to strum, and you can learn chords. It has good progression. It's one of those songs where, again, I think if anybody wants to learn how to sing and play at the same time too, it's good for that, because the rhythm pattern of the way you sing with the chord changes, it flows together well where you can balance both playing and singing. That's something I was never able to crack. I'm not good at multitasking. I think that's something I really admire about all this singer songwriters out there, that they can do that. It just, to me, seems impossible. But it's one of those songs where I think if you have a kid that's out there that's 12, 13 years old and wants to learn how to play guitar, like, they should be learning this first. The first song they should learn, the second song should be Manic Depression by Jimi Hendrix.
We're gonna get some emails for people signing up for your guitar and vocal lessons.
Javier is going to be out there like, no, 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 no,
Mm.
no. Don't do
Mhm.
any of those things. Don't do any of those things.
Mhm. But yeah, I mean, Redemption Song has been covered thousands and thousands of times. It's one of those kind of standards. I mean, the Joe Strummer version, I think, is probably the one that I go back to when I want to listen to it. This is interesting because it's solo electric and not solo acoustic. I think that adds a little bit to it. Ed gets to kind of dig in and get a little crunchy with it and add a little bit of punch to it, which I think helps. It's not like one of those kind of kumbaya imagined versions, which can kind of lose people. So yeah, this is fine. It kind of like it takes you back a little bit to like the original. He kind of tries to channel some of the original kind of spirit of the song, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice moment, especially because it's almost the end of the night and he's paying tribute to, no pun intended, a legend. So the last two songs of the night are Yellow Ledbetter and one of my sneaky favorite covers they do that they didn't play very often. This is the era for it. Let My Love Open the Door. Ledbetter is interesting because this is the 10th performance of the song. So they're still trying to figure out what they have with it and see where it works. And this is really at the time they're thinking, okay, this could start being a closer now. I was pretty impressed how Mike was attacking it, because usually after the first chorus, when he attacks it now, it's very bluesy, but this he gets really shreddy and kind of hangs on to those notes and kind of pierces them a little bit that we're not really used to, because they weren't trying to create that let's all celebrate together atmosphere with the song. They were just trying to play a song and trying to put up a good version of it. But while Mike was doing that, Ed was living up to the identity of the song of nobody knows the fucking lyrics to this, because he didn't know any of the fucking lyrics to it. So in 10 shows, I don't expect him to be perfect on that at all. But it goes with saying that not even him can figure it out, I suppose, at the time.
Yeah. And it's very sparse too, like those early versions where I don't even think Stone and Jeff are playing more than just a handful of notes throughout the whole song. Stone sits out for a whole section of it. So it's basically just Ed, Mike, and Jack for a long, long portion of it. So Mike really gets a chance to shine and fill that and do the Hendrix thing that he does.
Closing this one out is going to be Let My Love Open the Door. The Soldier Field version is so iconic because the moment kind of comes out of nowhere. They play Everyday People, they're with Brendan O'Brien, and the venue's iconic. So already you know the weight of what's happening, and the show is special in its own right for sure. And Sly and the Family Stone is so outside of the 1995 wheelhouse that it throws you off a little bit, but you love it. I love how they did that. And then all of a sudden the song just kind of stops and you hear those chords come in, that dun 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 dun. And I get the goosebump moment out of that. You hear that and you can feel the passion seeping out of that. And I felt that with this version too. It's Ed again paying tribute to his hero, Pete Townsend. Whenever they did it in this era, it really felt like they were putting some juice on it. It felt like they were able to take it and really elevate it to a level that Townsend never put that song in. And for Townsend, it's very much a sweet song. But when they do it, it's continuing to be a sweet song while being a celebratory moment as well. And it's very special the way they put it all together. Again, sneakily, one of my favorite covers they've ever done.
This is Ed totally in his element, just embodying Pete Townsend, and he treats it with some reverence. You can tell it's like a lot of times for covers, Sonic Reducer or Leaving Here, you get a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, but you can tell he really wants to do the song justice.
All right, on to our top three for us. Let's figure out how the fuck to do this. Do you want to do a top 10? Because this show might be deserving of it. I'll be honest with you. This is going to be really tough. That's why you're going to go first, because I'm going to think about it.
My number three, after we talked about it, I really wanted to give Spin the Black Circle in there, but Spin the Black Circle is going to get an honorable mention. My number three is going to be State of Love and Trust. My number two is Immortality, and my number one is, of course, W.M.A.
All right, we got Sharon 2 right there. I'm going to go Let My Love Open the Door is going to be number 3. Immortality is going to be number 2. And WMA is going to be number just 1 and counting, I suppose. How it could be more of a 1 than that, I don't know. So with that all being said, now we rate it. So where are we at with this?
All right, Missoula. Throwing down the gauntlet on this thing. This is an awesome listen. There's so much to talk about, so many talking points, like you've heard, a lot to go back to. This is a 10 out of 10.
To me, it's a classic show, and it's the best of what they could do in 1995, especially this early on, to have that chemistry with Jack. This show is extremely explosive, and everything you hear from the Vitalogy songs on down just gives you the classic Pearl Jam that I think all of us are nostalgic about. This show is going into the Live on Four Legs Hall of Fame. It is a 10 out of 10 for both parties here. Indiana Jones, where does this belong?
That belongs in a museum.
Thank you. It is our second Hall of Fame inductee of the year, following Paramount 1994, 2 early 90s shows that we got in there. How about that?
Yeah, very nice.
These 2000 shows have been like, what's going on? What do we got to do? What do we got to do here? Well,
It'd be nice to get Missoula some representation in there.
Yeah. Do we have a Missoula show in the Hall of Fame? I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, there's that 2012 show we haven't done yet that apparently is an instant classic that nobody knows any idea why. But at some point, I guess we'll dig into that and figure it out. But that is not for right now, because we are moving on with the rest of the locations that are happening on this tour, which means if we do Missoula now, the next week after Missoula is going to be Indianapolis. That's right. For all of you guys that were excited to go to Indianapolis last year and you entered the amphitheater at Deer Creek and they told you turn around and go home, it ain't happening tonight. I know a lot of people were upset about that, but The band made it right. They told you, hang on to those tickets. We're just postponing. We're not canceling. And that's why it's going to be the second show of this tour to get it out of the way, to make sure those guys have their show. And we're going to pay a little tribute now. There's only been 4 shows in Indy in the past. We've done one from 1998. This show that we're going to do is 2010, because we haven't had a 2010 show done in a while. So we're going to get to doing that next week for you guys. So if you like what you heard today, a Hall of Fame episode and all, in a classic era like 1995, then I hope you are subscribed to this podcast. If you're not, then head on over to your favorite podcast platform like Spotify, Apple, or YouTube to be notified anytime that a new episode comes out, and get it in your inbox and get it into your headphones. And if you want to do a little bit more than that, then you are free to give us a 5-star rating on the podcast platforms. It helps us out, helps visibility, helps ego a little bit. And look, if somebody sees that we have a very good rating scale, then they'll think, okay, maybe these guys are legit. But also, if they see that, they'll see some comments down at the bottom and they'll say, hey, these people are saying this about this podcast, and I see that they covered a show that I went to at one point. Am I going to enjoy this? Am I going to like this? And you know what? You guys are the ones to tell them that, yes, you are going to enjoy this podcast. It's going to be a nice trip down memory lane. So if you guys can share a comment with the world, let people know what you think about what we're doing, then we'd be honored to feature that on our Apple page. And hopefully with the tour going on, that people get to talk about this and share what we're doing. And yeah, just keep it going, because that's the next couple weeks when this tour is going on, when we got people out on scene doing the podcast episodes. And if you're going to those shows and if you want to get involved, everybody's allowed to get involved. So let us know. We'll get you hooked up with the team, whoever's out there. And that's the way you keep spreading the word. And we appreciate that we've gotten this far and have been doing this for almost 300 episodes. We're very close. We got 2 more before the big 300. That'll be a nice little celebration in itself. So, with that being said, this may be the end. We're here, but not for much longer. And although we may be parting ways, miss you already, miss you always. All right, tour time next week. You'll be listening to an episode right before the first night, which happens to be in the same city that we talked about today, Missoula, Montana. Until then, see ya on the pod.
Hi, Jesus.
Bullshit, bun shot, big shrimp, beluga snot, bun shot, bug shriek, buff shine, blood simple, bean shoot, ball shad, beef stew, beef shank, beef swellington, beef sucks, beet seed, ball sucker, bent shot, buff steroid, beefcake shithead. Black is beautiful, bungee swirl, Buffy St. Marie, Bobby socks, blank sheets, beanie sweat, bulbous shrinky, Playboy bunny suck, black spit, boring slit, boneheaded bitch slip, brown shit, big sky. Thanks, good night.